Good afternoon, everybody who's joined us so far. Welcome to the launch of the Health Equity Network. While we wait for other people to join us, we'll show a short video.
Companies play an important role in our health and well-being through the goods and services they provide, where they choose to influence the communities they inhabit and their environments, and how they look after employees. Take George and Samita. Despite coming from similar backgrounds, business practice shaped their experiences. When George left school with no mentor or connections in industry, he took a job in data entry. His employer gave him repetitive work and no guidance on how he could develop. It was boring, and he sat in front of a computer all day putting on weight. He couldn't even cycle to work because there was nowhere to lock his bike. He could only afford a small, damp flat on the outskirts of a town and worried about money. George found work harder to find as he got older. He got married and started a family, but his children spent most of their time indoors. It wasn't a safe area, and it was a long way to the park. George was diagnosed with high blood pressure. He gave up work because of ill health and died at 68. When Samita left school, she began a data analysis apprenticeship. Her employer supported her to gain valuable skills and plan her career, and gave her guidance about her personal finances. This helped her to rent her first flat. She was allowed to work from home 2 days a week, which suited her lifestyle. And when she went to work, there were lockers and showers if she cycled. Samita also got married and started a family. The company supported her through postnatal depression and provided education on saving for retirement and getting a mortgage. She bought a home near good schools and green spaces. Samita enjoyed an active retirement into her 90s. Whilst many factors influence us through life, companies can help shape a better and healthier quality of life. We think it's time for all companies to prioritise health so we can build back fairer as well as better.
Welcome to everybody, the more than 1,000 people who've registered to join us at the launch of the new Health Equity Network. I'm Jessica Allen. I'm the Deputy Director at the UCL Institute of Health Equity, and I'm chairing this launch today. Just to note that we're recording this session and it will be made available publicly on the network and on the Institute's website. So we have an excellent lineup of speakers today, absolutely delighted to introduce them. We'll start with Professor Sir Michael Marmot, the Director of UCL's Institute of Health Equity. We'll be talking about why we need a health equity, our hopes for it, what we hope to achieve, followed by Pete Gladwell, who's the Group Social Impact and Investment Director at Legal & General, and he'll be talking about the role of businesses in reducing health inequalities, followed by Dr. Henry Kippin, Managing Director of the North of Tyne Combined Authority, talking about the experiences in North of Tyne and how he thinks networks will be able to support his work to tackle health inequalities in that area. And then we'll go to Alan Higgins, who's leading the network for the Institute of Health Equity, and he'll be explaining how the network will work, as well as some of our hopes and ambitions for the network. Please post any questions that you have. There's a link in the chat which you can access, and an indication as to who you'd like the question to be for. We'll have a short period of time at the end of the talks for questions, but if we don't answer your question, we'll be endeavouring to summarise some of the responses to the questions on the network. So it's with great pleasure that I'd like to introduce Michael Marmot to kick us off. Over to you, Michael.
Thank you, Jessica. I am excited. Let me explain why. In fact, I was doing something slightly unusual. I was lecturing to our global health students at UCL, and one student asked me at the end of my lecture, "What keeps you going?" And I've had variants of that question. Why aren't you depressed? given what's happening nationally? Aren't people just ignoring the recommendations you've made in a succession of reports? And the answer is, I'm excited because of I have to give an evidence-based answer, of course. I'm excited because of the evidence of what's going on in localities right across the United Kingdom. I've listed here the areas we've been working in: Coventry, Greater Manchester, Cheshire, Merseyside, Lancashire and Cumbria, Luton, Waltham Forest, Gwent. Ambition to be the first Marmot region in Wales, the South West region, and to be confirmed this year. Leeds wants to be a Marmot city, the North of Tyne Combined Authority, Kent and Medway. In fact, I was in Scotland last week. Fife would like to be the first Marmot region in Scotland. And when we work with these regions, cities, districts, we work with business, with the voluntary and community sector, with ICSs, Marmot Trusts, and of course with local government and other public sector organizations. There's next slide, please. And when we work with these organizations, we've been producing reports. Coventry did their own report on becoming a Marmot city. Build Back Fairer in Greater Manchester, Altogether Fairer in Cheshire and Merseyside, Lancashire and Cumbria, Luton Town, and so on. And there's a negative and a positive reason for working locally. The negative reason is if there has been insufficient action nationally to address the social determinants of health and health equity, then we need to get action at some other level: cities, regions, districts. The positive region is there's real interest, commitment to working to improve the quality of lives of people in cities and local areas. People who are working locally tend to have a much richer, deeper understanding of the realities of the conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work and age, of the social determinants of health. And that's a very positive reason for working locally. The reason for setting up this network is to build on the work we've been doing with cities and regions. We'd like every city and region in the United Kingdom to be active on improving the quality of lives of their citizens, and hence being active on improving health and reducing health inequalities. Active as we at the Institute of Health Equity have been, we cannot produce reports for every single local authority or city in the country. Quite impossible, and nor is it necessary. The whole idea of a network is that there can be learning, mutual learning, sharing. We think crucial to putting in place plans for improvement is to put in place a monitoring system. So we can see not just is there progress over the longer term in reducing health inequalities, but is there progress in the short and medium term in improving the indicators that will lead to better health and narrower health inequalities. So we want to learn from experience, and we want to share that learning. There are more than 600 people on this call, a great deal of interest. And the idea is that if the platform works, if this network works, and we wouldn't be setting it up if we didn't think it could work, there will be mutual learning, sharing of experiences, understanding what works. I said at some meeting of a community organization that my private wish was that every local authority in the country would be acting to create a fairer society. It was put to me that I just expressed my private wish at a public meeting. So here we are. It's my public wish that we all work together to create a fairer society with better health and narrower health inequalities. And this network is the way we want to try and achieve it.
Many thanks, Michael. Next up, please, Pete Gladwell.
Okay, thank you. Well, I've been asked to say a few words on the role of business in addressing health inequality, and perhaps a little bit about why Legal and General of all people are supporting a health equity network. So if you're okay to flick onto the next slide, that would be fantastic, please. So two main reasons for this. The first one is, as Sir Michael's and Jessica's reports have outlined over the years, there are real inequalities in our society that need to be addressed. And this is not a small issue, it's a big issue. And in fact, the main reason that we originally got in touch with Professor Sir Michael is because we could see that his reports were quite rightly urging government to do more and working with NHS and local authorities. But actually, we could see that this issue was so big, it couldn't be handled and tackled by those alone. There was a role for business and industry in addressing this social injustice and these disparities and inequalities. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the way we were really thinking about this within L&G, but again, this isn't about L&G, it's about where we see that investors in general should be going, is to think about health in the same way that we start to think about our environmental impact, and we have been thinking about our environmental impact. So over the last decade, the environmental impact and climate impact of our investments has really risen up the agenda. And we've really started to pay quite close attention for about the last 15 years, but increasingly the momentum of that has increased over the last 5 years in terms of what's the carbon emissions, water, waste, how is this investment that we're making having a positive or a negative impact on the environment. And business in general has got pretty good. I mean, obviously huge amounts more to do, and you know, there's various egregious displays of business not doing this very well. But my point is that the environmental impact of business has really risen up the agenda in recent years. Actually, what we think needs to happen now is that the health inequality of impact of business needs to come up the agenda as well. So just as COP26 has illustrated the power of business and investment to affect climate change, we think it's probably time for a COP1 on health equity. How is business impacting health inequality for better or for worse? And how can we apply the same rigor that we have on the environmental side to health inequality as well? So that's where we're coming from with this. So if I go to the next slide. So that led to us working with the team at UCL, and we were really proud of the Marmot review for industry, which looked at really quite a fundamental kind of drains up as to how business can impact health inequality. Flicking to the next slide, you'll see that just as with the environmental side, there are kind of 3 scopes of environmental impact. We identified, and the UCL team led the identification of 3 scopes of business impact. So there's both the pretty fundamental basics of how you treat your own employees as a business. There's also the products that you put out and what you provide to society and the health impact of the products that you create. And then lastly, and equally importantly, there's things like acting as an anchor institution. What are the partnerships that you create? What is the influence that you as a business are having in communities and in society? Are you paying fair taxes, et cetera, et cetera? So those are the 3 scopes that we identified, and that the reports identified, and really grateful for the work the UCR team did on that. And we went and took that around the country. It was launched at an event with Andy Burnham in Manchester, and it's been really well received by businesses since. Just to where we go next there, and moving on to the next slide, if that's okay, please. It was all very well, as it were, sponsoring a report and working with the team on a report, but that kind of encouraged us to look in our own backyard and say, well, actually, you know, in case Legal and General is in danger of sounding like some, innocent and holier than thou type organisation, we kind of say, well, where can we do better as an institution, and how can we affect health inequality? And so we have about £25 billion worth of property around the UK that we own on behalf of people's pensions. And one of the things we identified is actually some of the cleaners and security guards who take care of those properties are not, for example, being paid sick wages by the facilities managers that we used. So we commissioned this report with Tavistock all about how we, as people who own huge amounts of commercial property on behalf of people's pensions, can work to address the health equity of those hidden workers, as we called them. And that's led to a really kind of concerted effort across L&G to bring our facilities managers in line with best practice. And we've made quite clear commitments about how we want to treat the workers and how we want to be building health equity there. But I hope this isn't sounding like an advert for L&G, because the point I'm trying to acknowledge here is actually we recognised we needed to do better, and we weren't really as squeaky clean as we wanted to be in this area, but we recognised there was a way we could make a positive impact. And more recently, we did get a bit of trouble with the Sunday Times about this, but we very intentionally pressurised Sainsbury's as a major shareholder in Sainsbury's to pay their key workers a London living wage. And that did give us get us a bit of stick because we weren't being capitalist enough. But actually, again, it was one of those things where it was important for us that we did the right thing and about the health equity of paying a decent wage, and Sainsbury's doing that. So that's where we've got to. Why do we do this? Well, and why do we think it's important that business does this? Well, it is about social justice, and it's important that we're upfront about that. This isn't just about being a good business. It's also about the fact that this is the right thing to do. But nevertheless, we do think it has benefits for business and for industry. It does mean that if you've got a healthier workforce, they tend to be more productive, which is always good. It helps us retain the best staff and people like my colleagues on the call today who really care about this. You recruit better people as well, people who really care about this thing, who actually put their heart into the job and really care about the impact they're having. And hopefully it will mean more people choose to do business with L&G in future. So that's for us as a company. And obviously, as we've seen other businesses go on this trajectory, we would expect them to see the same benefits which were identified in the UCL IHE report. And just one more slide from me, I think. Yes, so where do we see there being particular focus, and where are we hoping this network will really impact change, and where do we see a role for ourselves in future? Well, the food industry, let's be honest, is one where we see the product in particular, its scope 2, to go back to that previous framework. The food industry really can have a positive or a negative impact on health inequality across society, particularly in the UK. So we are a major shareholder in many of the food and supermarket groups, as I alluded to earlier. And we do think that we will need to continue to encourage them to consider how they're addressing health equity, and really in the same way as they've started to consider their environmental impact, consider how their health equity impact is playing out as well. We'd like to do much more work this year around housing and infrastructure and how we create places that promote health equity. There's been some great research on this already, but we think there's much more to do. And then financial services and the role they can play. Again, I won't go into that in detail, but there's a considerable potential for additionality in that area as well. And then lastly, a slide on the network, just to finish off, if I've got my slides right. So why network, why local from our perspective? Well, it's really important, and I think, again, this has come out in previous Marmot reviews, that this is a local issue. So this is definitely place-based. There's huge disparities in health equity across the UK. And again, just even in terms of the business impact of health inequality, we're talking about levelling up and how we boost the productivity of the UK. Well, 30% of the shortfall in productivity in that northern powerhouse area is because of ill health. So there's a direct link between the productivity of businesses and growth, and healthy, inclusive growth, and addressing the kind of regional disparities in health equity. And there's a very clear link there, but the link is local. And so part of the reason for tackling this, part of the way through which we tackle this as a country and as a society, is building that local network that enables people to have a local impact, a local additionality. And Henry will talk about that more in a second. And secondly, just to click onto the final slide on the network before I hand over, is because we just think the local is where it's at in terms of having an impact. You know, we've got this example of a £4 billion partnership with the West Midlands Combined Authority. Well, L&G is stewarding about 250,000 people's pensions and savings across the West Midlands. And so what we're trying to do is create this circular economy where people's pensions and savings are going back into their region. But the whole point of that is it's not going via London or via Whitehall or Westminster. It's within the region the impact is being felt, because regional leaders like Henry and others know how we can know what can be done to make a real impact in their place and drive this impact and drive and address the health inequalities that exist in that area. And so finally for us, and the final slide is about change. This is all about change at the end of the day. We really wanted to work with the Marmot team to create this network, because if we want to see change in all these areas, we believe that whether it's working with the West Midlands or the North of Tyne or the many other organisations that we're delighted to see on the call today, it's about driving that change locally, and that impact will be felt when we can facilitate people who want to change in their area. I'll finish with this quote, and I've had to tweak it slightly because I don't know if I can call a group of 1,000 people a small group. But what we're aiming to create with this is a group of people who are thoughtful and are committed and want to change the world, quite probably by starting with their place, with their village, with their town, with their region. And if we can facilitate that as a company, working collaboratively with the Institute of Health Equity and others, we'll be really delighted. That's it from me. Thank you.
Many thanks, Pete, and for setting out the positive role that business can have, and legal in general has done a great deal in this way. And I don't know if you saw, Pete, but there were lots and lots of positive reactions as you were talking. Please do send comments and questions in. The link is on the chat, and you can access the way to submit questions. Please do keep them coming in. And we'll ask Henry Kippin now to talk about the work in the north of Tyne. Thanks, Henry.
Thanks, Jessica. Hope everybody can hear me. And just in case you think I've got the grandest front room in show business, I'm parked here at the RSA in central London. Equally thrilled to be part of this. I have to be honest, a great emerging network, and absolutely right on the button of where we want to be in north of Tyne and the northeast, which is to say that we know, I think, as practitioners, that creating a sustainable economy in both senses of the word, both economically sustainable and in that shift to net zero, the strong society, the scaffolding, if you like, that social infrastructure that we need to make that work, and reducing health inequalities are completely inseparable parts of any industrial strategy or local strategy. So if there was a coin with three sides, there would be three sides, if you like, of the same coin. And what you can see emerging in the north of Tyne and across the northeast more widely is a real snapshot of what that might look like in practice. In a sense, our region is a bit of a test bed for the UK. It covers city, coast and country. We really feel that we are putting into place the building blocks for doing devolution differently, in a way that's not just driven by the economic and the commercial return, as Pete said, but by that sense that we're here to drive benefits in terms of increase in healthy life expectancy and well-being in the round. And so what you'll see coming through in the programme is a really big focus on those things that create well-being and prosperity through any combined authority. That is the case: jobs, skills, housing and culture, but also targeting that work in ways that specifically address what we know are, in effect, as a productivity lag for our region, as with many others, because of the well-being gap and the way that health inequalities play out within that region. So we're working hand in glove with colleagues to try and bring that forward, both now, which I'll talk about in a second, lots of really good quality practical things, some of which we've pinched from learned colleagues on this call and others that are new, but also in the near future, our colleagues across the northeast have just signed a big new devolution deal that absolutely has shot through the whole thing, that transition in terms of climate, but also the notion that you might use devolution to address health inequalities and address poverty over the long term, as well as grow the economy. So the headline message from me really at a practitioner level is we know, and we absolutely have to believe and continue working on the basis that this is not a zero-sum game. Health and growth are mutual bedfellows, public service reform and economic reform must go hand in hand to drive this agenda. Next slide, please. So how does that play out in practice? Well, as with any combined authority or city region or local authority indeed, and I'm sure there's lots reflected on the call, a mixture of really practical, tangible things that our citizens and residents can touch and taste and feel, and long-term practice, which inevitably for us is shaped by our investment fund, which shapes a vision for 30 years for our region. That in and of itself is shaped by inclusive growth principles. So if you look at the things that we are held to account by Treasury and colleagues on the basis of, it is not just jobs and GVA and private sector leverage, it is about inclusive growth outcomes, and that's baked into our devolution deal. Now that's increasingly, I think, going to be part of the way things work. We've developed a wellbeing framework with our colleagues at Carnegie, and including insight from the IHE, from the artist formerly known as Public Health England, from our local authorities, and most importantly from our communities, and a range of really practical actions, in particular around skills, human capital, people, around housing and affordability and well-being, and around making sure that we have the social scaffolding to make sure that our most marginalised communities can take advantage of these jobs that are being created in the region by our partners. And I think the big insight that comes from that, really, which is not new news but is absolutely fundamental, is that doing this requires a real cross-sector effort. So much as Pete said, this is not about doing public health practice brilliant in and of itself. This is not about the private sector making a change in and of itself. This is about really strong public, private and social sector collaboration, and really creating that space to be what we've called quietly revolutionary. Now, devolution has to do that, doesn't it? Otherwise, it's just more of the same, and what's the point otherwise? So I think we're really keen, and with strong political leadership across the piece, to really push the envelope in this area. Next slide, please. Which mercifully is also the last one. So if you take all of this, and really a region that certainly has its challenges in terms of how health inequality plays out, it's certainly had its challenges in terms of its recovery from previous recessions. How is that going to make a big difference here? How are we taking what we've just talked about and what we've heard from Sir Michael into practice? There's 3 areas I'd like to just touch on here. So the first is a really exciting investment plan. It follows Pete's comments about the relationship between capital investment in a place and well-being. We're developing a health and growth investment plan, which is based on those principles with some of the colleagues on the call. That is an absolute watch this space moment, because it will really make a big difference. The second, as I've talked about, is our devolution deal, which is a health, inclusive growth and net zero deal. So you can read that now on the government's website, and certainly a lot of great levers there to make sure that we are driving improvements in well-being alongside those economic benefits. And then the third is really the network, and the reason why we're here today. So we are, I think, a bit fed up in the public sector of being cats at the light every time there's a bit of new funding dangled for something that seems socially good. What we absolutely have to start doing is collaborating more strongly across local areas within them, and doing that with help from colleagues who can point us in the right direction nationally in terms of what good and better would look like. And I think being part of that for the north of Tyne and for the wider northeast is going to be really beneficial for us. We're going to be really active participants and would encourage others to do the same. I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Many thanks, Henry. Really important to see how the network can support getting health equity central in local areas and through devolution. Apparently a lot of people are putting their hands up to speak, but can we ask you please to use the link as the chat isn't open for questions. Now turn to Alan Higgins to talk about how the network will work in practice and how we hope it will support public health practitioners. Over to you, Alan.
Thanks very much, Jessica. And I'm absolutely delighted that we've got to this point where we're launching the network through this webinar. And of course, having got to this point, the next part is even more important, because we want to make sure that everybody who's on the webinar today and those who are on the waiting list actually do sign up to become members of the network and to be very active on the network as well. By the end of the webinar, there will be a link made available for you to begin the registration process. So I'm going to do now the riskiest part of the webinar, because I'm going to link live to the website just to talk you through what's actually on there. So bear with me for a moment as I share screen. And if somebody could just confirm for me that that's up there.
It's working.
Thanks very much, Pete. So when you've joined the network, and you do it through the link that we'll provide at the end, then you'll have your application approved, and then you'll come on to this live feed part of the network. And you'll be met by various suggestions here as to how you will make the most out of your network membership. So the first thing to do will be set up, customize your membership profile. Visit other network members' profiles. I'm just going to go to one here, Mark Swift, good friend from working in Cheshire, Mersey. And you can see that Mark has already set up a profile for Wellbeing Enterprises, specifying where he works, the kind of sectors that he's interested in working in, and also then summarizing his interest in health equity around social models of health system work and social innovation. And down here also saying about what it is that he would like to collaborate on. Again, social side of health and public health. Mentions there about what Wellbeing Enterprises can do. So that's the kind of thing that you would go to first. Set up your profile, say what your interests are in health equity, and then what you want to collaborate with other people about, and then make connections with them. What we've also set up and kind of pre-populated are groups that you can join, kind of sub-networks that you can join within the network itself. The first one that we're looking at here is the Health Equity Interest Group, and there's about 14 in here that we've put in. The first 8 you'll recognise as being Marmot principles from the various reports that have been done. But there's others here, a load more, that we have put in place, such as leadership in health equity, food and nutritional inequalities, housing and health, and so on. And we've put those in there just to get people started. But you can actually create other groups. You can send a request through to us as the administrators. We can set a group up. You can invite other people to join. What that means is that when you're in a group, you're talking to people who are similarly interested in food and nutritional inequalities or whatever it happens to be. And there's no limit in how many groups you can join. It just means that you've got people coming together who are particularly interested in that issue. So, and as well as the Health Equity Interest Groups, there's organisational sector that was set up. So if you're in an NHS Foundation Trust, you want to talk to other people in Foundation Trust, then you can join that group too. Social enterprises, local government, public health, and so on. And again, if we haven't, as is most likely, captured everybody's interest, then you can ask us to set up another group. And there's one more that I won't go into, which is about UK countries and regions, which is called Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and then each of the regions of the UK. So that if you're working in those particular areas, you want to find out who else in the Northwest or in Northern Ireland or in Scotland is also in the Health Equity Network, and you want to make contact with them, then you can do that through those groups. What else have we got here? We've got a link through to recent IHE publications. All the publications will be available through here. What we'll also be doing is providing briefings on the IHE publications to network members, so you can pick up on what it is that we're producing analyses on, producing evidence based on as well. Last thing I'll mention here, well, 2 things. You can also post events that are coming up. There's one here, which is the webinar itself that Alison posted. There's also one that Chris has posted from Jersey, looking at a program on asset-based community development. So you can post there and look at what people have posted in the past. So coaching for systemic change, I think Joe posted that in Scotland, Alternative Futures Workshop, and so on. And the reason we have these in already is that we were running a pre-test of the network just to make sure it was working. But it shows that you can actually get on the network and then post about what you're doing as well and invite other people to engage with you. Last thing, and I'll come back, is that there is a forums section where you can post, and I'll click on the new discussion bit, something that you want to create a discussion on. So type in the title here, select tag, write your content here. And that's something that you want to get other people to respond to. Things that you think are going well where you're working, perhaps things that you're struggling with, but also you might want to find out from other people about how things are going. So all that potential is there in the network. And what we need is for you to join up and to help us make that function properly. So I will stop sharing and then come back to the screen with you. And just to say that I'm very excited about this network. As a long-standing public health practitioner, and I still work in the place-based work across the country, I very much would welcome having a network where I can go and engage with other people who are also doing this health equity work. But I'd also say that we in the IHE will be looking to pick up on what people are discussing within the network and take those ideas a bit further, provide some leadership as to how they might have national potential, for instance, or how they might relate to what other people are doing in other parts of the country. So it will not be a passive network. IHE will be engaged in it. We'll be helping to provoke discussion. We'll be bringing in briefings that we're aware of. We'll also be linking with other think tanks, other groups that are also working in this area. So there may well be some duplication, but we're hoping to work together with other networks too. So that's all I would say at the minute. We'll hand back for questions, but then at the end, please do look to the sign up link. Thanks very much, Jessica.
Thank you very much, Alan. And questions are coming in. Thank you. Please do. You can continue posting. A question, I think at least two of the speakers explicitly mentioned how vital local action has been. How can we use this as well? How can we use the network, do you think, to support greater action nationally and to get this further up the agenda nationally? And is the network a good vehicle for doing that? So maybe, Michael, if you could start, but any of the speakers, please do jump in.
Well, when I said that my hope was that there would be so many local areas acting, but my perhaps slightly jaundiced view of how you get national action, if 95% of the population is marching in a particular direction, the leaders run round the front of the march and pretend they were leading it from the beginning. If the population is all trying to act on trying to improve the conditions in which people live and work to create greater health equity, and populations sign up to that, if our democracy really works, it will encourage national government to change. At the moment, as we've documented in reports, national policies, I mean, you remember, Jessica, we called our COVID-19 review Build Back Fairer. We said that health was going in the wrong direction pre-COVID, and we should not be seeking to re-establish the status quo. What we've got now is a chancellor who's seeking to re-establish the status quo pre-COVID. That will probably cause the same damage that the decade from 2010 on caused. And we need clamour for change. And I would venture to suggest if major cities, districts, regions all around the country are working to improve things and change, that will actually lead to change in national policies.
Thank you. Any of the rest of the panel like to comment on the role of national? Henry?
A quick comment just to build on Sir Michael's response, which I completely agree with. I mean, we to ask ourselves, what does a national response look and feel like? Well, actually, to me, that's about impact locally being aggregated through that kind of leadership and collaboration, exactly in the way that he talked about. I think the other thing to add to this is that this is not just a social and health set of issues. This is about the economy of the country, and fundamentally, whether you look at health inequity and how that plays out through the social or the economic lens, it's equally as important. So even if you had hypothetically a government that cared not a jot about reducing the healthy life expectancy gap, the economic potential of closing that is so equally clear that I think either way round, and certainly through the devolved areas, you will see this practice coming up just as much as part of the economic strategies of mayors and regions as their strategies for social infrastructure.
Thank you. And a related question, I suppose, and perhaps Pete, you could respond to this initially, and then again, other speakers, please jump in. Businesses becoming involved in health inequalities, it can be expensive. So the question is, do you think there's an appetite from investors to support and fund smaller businesses to help them address health inequalities when struggling with resources and capacity?
Yeah, it'd be great to understand a bit more about the kind of issues that person is identifying specifically. I mean, I think part of the reason for us funding the report and working with the team in the first place was to try and do exactly that, actually, to do the kind of research that smaller businesses might struggle to be able to fund, but then provide it in a very open source way, as we all are doing with this network as well. So I suppose that's part of it for us, but if there are other specific issues, it'd be interesting to understand those in a bit more detail. I think that the one thing the pitfall I wouldn't want us to fall into, though, and I don't know if I communicated this clearly, is this isn't always a matter of choosing between the kind of financial side and doing the right thing. As I hopefully alluded to, there are lots of reasons why this is a sensible business decision. Actually, just like doing the right thing by the environment is quite often a sensible business decision. There are some points where you have to make that difficult decision between doing the right thing and making money, or making as much money as you possibly could. But even for smaller businesses, there are lots of reasons. I hope I highlighted some of those. You know, for example, how you treat your staff. You will retain staff better. Your staff will be more productive. And so, you know, I wouldn't want us to fall into this trap of thinking that it's something that needs an innate subsidy for small businesses and large businesses to be able to really jump on board with.
Thank you, Pete. A question also about how we can support voluntary community sector, especially increasingly being relied upon at the moment to mitigate the impacts of increasing poverty. So what can this network do to help support voluntary and community sector? And maybe that question first to Alan.
Thanks, Jessica. In many ways, the response to that question could be similar to others, in that the network is open and would very much encourage people from community voluntary sector to engage with us. I will have a particular eye out for where people are joining from that sector, and we'll look to support people to engage with the network. So we'll be looking to pick up particular themes that would be of interest or have a particular perspective on them from the community and voluntary sector. So what I'd suggest is that you do sign up for the network. Contact me directly if you wish to do so, but we'll look for every possible way to encourage engagement from community and voluntary sector. I think through some of the themes, most of the themes that we have highlighted, active engagement of communities is key to actually addressing health equity. So it may not be visible there at the moment, but it's something that we'd very much like to encourage.
Thank you. Another question about business and related to products and services, actually. How can we ensure that businesses do more to protect health through the products and services, and the harm from health that results often from these products and services? I was mentioned alcohol and gambling, and some of the representative organisations which actually don't do sufficiently to tackle. Is that something that the network will be referring to, focusing on? Pete, perhaps you can respond to that. Thank you.
Yeah, so and I'd love to hear Sir Michael's view on this as well. I think the whole reason for us wanting to set this network up, from my perspective, is to exactly crowdsource ways people are dealing with this across the country, and what is the best practice. And rather than those of us on this screen, you know, trying to tell you what the best practice might be, as if we would so had a monopoly on these kind of things. Really, the fundamental principle of all of this is to enable people who are doing a fantastic job of, you know, tackling local gambling shops, or, you know, prevalence of fast food shops like there are in my local area of Harlesden in London. You know, how can we tackle that together? What are the approaches that seem to be working? So yeah, I mean, there are obvious things that spring to mind, like not using them, and if you're a local authority, you know, using planning levers, etc. But I think for me, the really fundamental point is we'll actually learn much more through the kind of the wisdom and the lived experiences of people in the network, and we want to facilitate that sharing in future.
Yeah.
Can I add For reasons that are behind the question about alcohol, gambling, ultra-processed food, public health has traditionally seen business as the enemy, and for good reasons. I mean, health-damaging products make a profit and damage people's health. And we haven't dropped that opposition to health-damaging products. It's absolutely vital. It's hard to imagine that the tobacco industry could be part of what we're trying to do, because what they sell has no redeeming features. It damages people's health. Finish, full stop. It's hard to imagine. And in fact, when we started working with Legal & General, we put to them, well, how can you get involved? And their response was, we're big investors. We don't want to invest in corporations that are damaging people's health. That's not a good investment decision. And that's really rather important, because we certainly don't want to be working hand in glove with businesses whose products damage people's health. This is of central importance. And that's why, of our 3 planks that Pete put up in his slide, the second was goods and services. And that's fundamental. I mean, one of the problems with diet and nutrition in this country, as people know very well, is that healthy food is more expensive than unhealthy food. And that is very difficult to deal with locally. That's got to be part of a national strategy to try and make this cost differential between healthy and unhealthy food less extreme, to make it easier for people to pursue healthy diets, to make it financially affordable. And you'll know with the cost of living crisis, the inflation in unhealthy food has been greater than the inflation in healthy food. So it's making the lives of people on low incomes even more difficult. So yes, the collaboration with industry is absolutely vital, but it does mean that we've got to pay careful attention to the health promoting or health denying nature of goods and services.
Thank you. To all the panelists, one of the ambitions for the network is to foster a social movement to really take forward action, put pressure on government to take action on health inequalities. How do you think this network will support creating a social movement? Perhaps we can start with Henry and then Alan and other speakers, if you'd like.
So the social movement starts with Henry and then Alan. That sounds. I'm not sure I'd want to sign up for that one. No, more seriously, I think that there is to go back to Sir Michael's answer about how change happens, and indeed Pete's last slide about how change happens. Small groups of committed people that can take things forward and see the impact grow through collaboration. That's in a sense what I think we should be using devolution for. So for me, the way to create that national impact is to make sure we have strong collaboration across areas, testing and trying and doing different things. I don't think I'm saying anything necessarily new there. I think the other area where you've seen some progress in devolved areas, our example in the north of Tyne is our Good Work Pledge. In Greater Manchester, there is a Sustainable Employment Charter, I think, or something similar. In West Midlands, there is a campaign called Thrive. They're all examples of really social networks that are created to support employers in a small or very big sense to sign up to good work principles, which are a massive driver of well-being in terms of both employee well-being and the kind of products and services that are out into the world and the supply chains for those too. So there's some really specific, I think, networks out there acting already that this network can tap into and start to grow the impact much quicker than might ordinarily be the case. Go on, Alan, over to you. How else are we going to do it?
I'll join your network and movement, Henry. Where I think we get, well, just picking up on that last point, is to recognise that there is already stuff happening. There is great movement activity within regions, within countries as well. And where I think the network will add to that is by taking some of those ideas. Hopefully they will be churned throughout the network as well. And what we'll do is keep an eye on that, pick up on the ideas that we think are developing in West Midlands, see how there's some similarity with what's happening in North of Tyne, Greater Manchester, and so on. And then we will bring those back to the network and say, this seems to be a theme that's developing in different parts of the country. That seems to have potential to develop into something further. So what we'll actually do within the network is feed those ideas back in and then start looking at how we can actually get some dynamism going, which suggests there is something that is happening in different parts of the country. And if they join together, they recognize each other, has that potential to be something which is happening on a national basis. And I think that's what we can do with this network, where perhaps we haven't done previously. And it's also something about looking to have this network crossing so many sectors. So other networks I've been involved in, very productive ones, have been particularly NHS focused, local government focused, and so on. What we're looking here is something which is across several sectors: NHS, local government, community voluntary sector, business, different aspects of business as well. So it's by looking at all those different aspects that I think we can actually add something to the kind of movements that are already there, develop them into something which we hope would have national impact. That's something I'm very excited about. It depends on people engaging with it, but we will also kind of provoke it. We will bring ideas to the network. We will look at the IHE reports and think that's something that the network could respond to, or may well be doing already, and then we'll develop the ideas further from that.
Thank you. Anything from Pete or Michael on the aspect of the social movement?
Yeah, if you read the national press, listen to the television, whatever, everybody's lining up to say Britain's not working, it's broken, desolation and despair. In all our work with local government, I can't remember the leaders in local government saying that. They're all working to say, how can we create something better? They're not giving up. They're saying, we've been dealt with a particular hand. We're going to do the best job we can. Whether it's in North of Tyne, Manchester, wherever we've been working, in Luton, Waltham Forest, we've got local leaders expressing hope, optimism, vision. Our wonderful colleague, Tammy Boyce, who many of the people in our network know, gave me a book yesterday. And on the cover of the book is Culture and Politics by Raymond Williams. On the cover of the book is the quote, "To be truly radical is to make hope possible rather than despair convincing." And what we're doing with our colleagues in local government, what the Henry Kippins of the world, the Andy Burnhams and so on are doing, is making hope possible rather than despair convincing. And we're going to build a social movement on making hope possible rather than despair convincing.
Thank you, Michael. Any final thoughts from our panelists? There are a few questions before we get to the final thoughts from the panelists, a few questions that have popped up in the chat about how the network will work. Just to say, it's available for anybody, individuals or organisations. You can join if you're overseas. The other organisations are invited, please, to put their evidence, load their evidence onto the website. We're trying to be as open as possible to everybody and to ensure that this is a knowledge exchange and it's not just us putting material out. We really want to invite other organisations and individuals, please, to contribute as much as possible. To the panellists, any final thoughts, please? I'll start with perhaps Henry.
Jessica, only to say thanks again for involving me, and just really a sense of excitement about what's possible. I mean, the best thing I can say probably at this point is just to put a dose of due humility into the conversation, that, you know, to be clear about what we don't know. We've got so much great practice out there globally and in the country that we're not necessarily using, collaborating on, taking up, embedding into our mainstream plans and ways of delivering. I think there's massive potential for us to do better, and huge potential to do that as devolution becomes part of the way that we work in the country in so many of our areas. And I think that's really exciting for those of us in the middle of it all, and actually, you know, really exciting for our political leadership, who ultimately have to stand up and be counted for this. So thanks again for involving me, and really thrilled at being part of it.
Well, thank you for your contributions and your interest. It's great. Alan, final thoughts.
I will just echo Michael's comment, actually, because if we didn't have hope, you wouldn't get up in the morning to do this work, because it's hard work and we've been doing it for many years. But what we're looking through the network is to put some practicality on that hope as well, and to enable people to find other people who are equally hopeful and want to share their work. So I'm very excited about where we can go with this. It will depend on people engaging with us, but we will provide that leadership to it too. But it's an exercise in hope, and let's see how far we can take it.
Thank you. Pete, any final thoughts before we close?
Yeah, I just want to stress, I suppose, that we want to kind of facilitate this, but Alan, contrary to his appearance, is not a dictator, an autocratic dictator who will be running this network for his own micromanagement. This is all what we're aiming to do. This is facilitate that movement, and we just encourage people to own this, use this, help us to kind of co-create it together. And you know, Alan's been brilliant at and Alison, who's also on the call, at facilitating that growth. But it does need people's engagement to really take it to the next level. So would really welcome people's continued involvement, and please don't see this as a kind of a baked cake. The cake is still there to be made. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much to all our panelists for their contributions and their enthusiasm and support for the network. Thank you to you all for joining and listening today. And we hope very much that you will join many other organisations and individuals, sign up for the network, contribute, and let's see where we can take this collaboratively as we all work together to try and tackle these unfair and unjust health inequalities experienced in our communities. So thank you all today. The link should be in the chat. Please join, and hopefully we'll see you all again there very shortly. Goodbye.